This week on the Capitol Report, unexpected developments as state legislators debate whether to override the governor's budget veto or not. Governor Malloy announces his choices to fill vacancies on the state Supreme Court. And Connecticut honors the Las Vegas shooting victims. Now, the Week in Review on the Capitol Report.
We are urging action on a veto override.
We've been asked by members from the other side of the aisle to override the governor's veto, and we clearly do not believe that's a great thing to do.
The week began as last week ended, with dueling news conferences. Republican legislators calling for an override of Governor Malloy's veto of the budget passed last month, and Democrats urging the veto to stand. Connecticut has been without a budget since July 1st, but now heading into the fourth month with the governor running the state by executive order, the impact is now starting to hit hard in many municipalities. That's because the governor's October 1st spending plan under his executive order has forced dramatic funding cuts and has even zeroed out money for 85 school districts in the state. An alternative to that, the Republican-written budget that passed with Democratic votes in mid-September, but the governor vetoed it. The state constitution allows the legislature to attempt to repass any bill vetoed by the governor. In an unexpected move on Monday, the Speaker of the House decided to move up the planned veto session to this week instead of next.
Is it an opportunity to end a week early the political silliness surrounding this budget? Yes, and I'm taking advantage of it. We need to get serious about passing a budget for the state of Connecticut. They can say it was a bipartisan budget, which it was, but it wasn't a compromise budget. They left one party out of the compromise, and it's the gentleman that sits in this office that has the ability to veto. The sooner we can get this budget off the table, we both sit down, negotiate with the governor, and come up with a budget that he will sign that'll move Connecticut forward, the better off we'll be.
Use of the word silliness is offensive to the people of this state. Because you don't like it does not make it silly, number one.
It cannot become law.
Number two, there is more than one option of having a governor sign a budget, and that is to override a veto. And because they are not willing to do that, or there is not the political will on the Democratic side to do that, does not make it silly. It is people lacking courage.
Taking $300 million out of higher education in the state of Connecticut that's vital to our economic recovery is silly. Taking tax incentives and car taxes out of the cities and taxing the most poorest people in the state of Connecticut is silly. Going out and hurting the middle class in Connecticut is silly, and that is the silliness. It's not a budget the governor will sign. As ours wasn't a budget that could pass. So let's all move on from this political ownership of these documents that won't become law, sit at a table and compromise and come to an agreement. That's what I'm ready to do.
So I guess what is not silly is allowing an executive order to go in that will cut education, allowing an executive order that's going to go in and cut municipalities, allowing an executive order that's going to go in and slash social services. I guess that's not silly. The bottom line of this is very simple. It might be a budget that they may not like, or I should say the governor doesn't like, and the members of the General Assembly spoke and majority passed. There is no other budget that right now is on the table that can pass with a majority vote. So you take this budget, if you're a reasonable person in a reasonable, objective arena, you would say, we take it in, it's got 90% of what we like, let's change the other 5 or 10% that we don't like. But we fund municipalities, we fund education, we fund social services, we fund drug addiction, we fund care for kids, we fund all those things, and then we change it the way we want to change it. And that's fair game. But without having a budget that's ready to go, what are you doing?
With Speaker Arasimowicz confident that he had the votes to sustain the governor's veto, attention turned to the latest bipartisan budget talks with the governor on Monday.
Well, we're meeting again tomorrow with the governor and trying to hone in on some areas that we talked about today. Areas related to both revenues and expenditures.
We're looking at numbers. Do we find some common ground on smaller things? Yes. But it's really going to come down to the bigger ticket numbers. We still have not found common ground.
But also on Monday, Governor Malloy placed a new deadline on the table.
My message to the leaders at the outset was that for all intents and purposes, if we're going to get a budget done in October, and we should, that basically we have to get that budget done by October 13th. Otherwise, we're going to end up going over all the way into November. And you might ask, well, why is that? Well, we have weddings taking place, we have people's travel plans, we have all kinds of things going on. And travel plans are one thing, but weddings and honeymoons, you know, are a little bit different. I have compromised every step of the way, from February till the Friday before the budget was done, to getting the budget done with my colleagues on the Democratic side. I have moved time and time and time again, and I'm not necessarily done moving in the effort to get a budget. But when I can't get people to put a cap on spending or a cap on revenue, and when we're still having discussions about what you can or can't do on a post-vesting basis, we're not making as much progress as I think we need to in a short period of time. But I really do. I think that for the state to go into November would be a great mistake.
The next day, on Tuesday, the House gavelled in for the veto override attempt. And again, an unexpected development.
Is there a motion for reconsideration of emergency certified House Bill 7501? Is there a motion from any member on the prevailing side of the vote on House Bill 7501?
Silence in the chamber lasted about 2 minutes before Speaker Arasimowicz moved on.
Seeing that no member from the prevailing side on House Bill Emergency Certified 7501, I recognize Representative Ritter of the 1st District.
There is no budget right now that is law in the state of Connecticut that avoids the current predicament that we're all in. And we all share a great deal of passion for what could happen if we don't find a way to begin to put some numbers and some words to paper that we can pass. I've heard of middle schools closing. I've heard of draconian cuts being made, property taxes having to be raised, and I agree with all of it. And one of the arguments has been, from both sides of the aisle, that if you don't put something up that passes, we're left with the executive order. So whether we did a reconsider and didn't override the veto, this was not going to pass today. And whether we did our own budget potentially without the support of the governor and we passed it by a couple of votes, it wouldn't have become law either. So let me talk about a path forward. And I hope that the only question that we ask ourselves when we leave here today, are we prepared to do this next week? Because it is a real path forward that will avoid October 31st. The Republican budget that passed and the Democratic budget that did not pass, literally identically, side by side, had $850 million in agreement and revenue. One need not read further. One need not study it. They're identical. We could pass that. If we can do this in a bipartisan way, it sends a message upstairs and there that the negotiations have changed, the debate has changed, the framework has changed. I believe now is a great moment of opportunity, and for those who criticize and disagree, I wholeheartedly respect you. I'm putting myself out there. I believe this is the only solution that will work in the next 7 to 10 days.
My problem is I think it oversimplifies this problem. We talk about where we are with this budget as if it's April, not October. We talk about where we are with this budget as if October 1st did not happen 2 days ago. And most of our towns or cities are either getting zeroed out with education funding or significantly cut. We talk about this budget as if there is not a viable option out there. The majority leader is correct. We do need something. We have something. We have an option of what we do with it. To sit here in the middle of negotiations and to call us in today, knowing damn well that those votes were not here today and we possibly could have gotten them moving forward, is a disservice to this state, is a disservice to the negotiations and all the parties, and is a disservice to the citizens of the state of Connecticut. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Madam Minority Leader, with that being said, are you prepared now to offer a motion for reconsideration?
No, Mr. Speaker, I am not.
The House then adjourned, and legislative leaders were asked to explain what happened.
Let's be clear about what just happened today also. Given the opportunity to discuss, defend, and vote for a veto override on their budget, the Republican Party decided to take a pass. I don't know what that was about. They asked for it. They campaigned around the state for it. And then given the opportunity, we heard nothing from crickets from the other side of the aisle. Now, I would say that's indicative of a flawed document, as pointed out by higher education. Some of the cities, Hartford going bankrupt, in other areas. That being said, we wanted to give them the opportunity to do it, and they decided not to. So where do we go from here is the question we were asking each other this morning. So we want to propose alternatives. In a very few short minutes, we're going to go over and meet with the governor again. I hope this talk about a veto override goes away because given the opportunity, they chose not to. But let's negotiate a budget that's fair.
We absolutely, positively stand behind the fact that overriding this veto is the best for the state of Connecticut. But to push this so quickly, just because you think you do not have the votes to override today, when we could be sitting in that room for the next week and hopefully come to an agreement on what this could look like to move the state forward, since we have a document in front of us. Working off a document you have is always better and more efficient than starting from scratch. And that was the reason we did not bring up the motion to override today.
Republican Senate Leader Len Fasano also pointed to legal questions related to the governor's executive order as a reason to keep the Republican budget document alive.
You're seeing a lawsuit by CEA, which is going to test the validity of the education spending. You've got Attorney General's opinion that puts his order $248 million now out of compliance. And we believe that you have to keep all your options on the table. We're in that room. There's arbitrary cutoff dates that people have set way back when. And as the majority leader said, look at these two budgets. They're pretty much identical with some exclusion. So we have always taken the position, don't override this budget. Let it go into play so you can fund education, you could fund municipalities, you could fund the social services, you could give security to those towns who are wondering what's going on, and then those items that you want to amend for various reasons, go through those line items and make those amendments.
Legislative leaders then joined Governor Malloy in his office for a brief meeting. Afterwards, the governor summed up the day's developments.
If the Republicans had the vote to override my veto, they would have done it. Because there's no reason not to have done it. So they didn't have the votes. And the Democrats made a suggestion. And then a discussion took place in the governor's office, and people have specific assignments on work that needs to be gotten done. And staffs will be working tomorrow, and leadership will get together on Thursday. There's your complete answer. That's what's going on.
He also offered new information about the budget talks moving forward. He said two documents are on the table. The compromise Democratic budget that did not pass, contained in Senate Amendment A, and the Republican budget that did pass but was vetoed in Senate Amendment B.
I think the reality is that discussions have to begin with the two Senate bills that are on the table. I think there's a recognition that we have to get to the point where we're going line item by line item after we tackle some big controlling issues like pension changes, whether they're legal or not legal, like can you take the teachers' 2% and not put it into a special fund? Is it legal for the state to offset its contribution to post-employment retirement benefits while paying for that by raising the employee contribution? Those are definite legal questions that need to be resolved. I think we're going to put people in a room who can help us resolve those issues.
Turning to Thursday, the governor said a budget agreement still seemed a far way off.
I would honestly say that we are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars apart. And so I want there to be an agreement by next Friday. There'd have to be a lot of movement in that situation. I think It's difficult for people to move those kinds of amounts of money around in a budget, and I don't want to give a false hope. I think people are working. I'm appreciative of the working, but we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars off.
And he added, the lack of a budget is hurting economic growth in the state.
We have discussions that are on hold with companies that want to enlarge their footprint or move to our state who said, hey, listen, when you get a budget, we'll have further discussion. Meanwhile, we're going to talk, at least in one case, with 5 other states. We're not going to talk to you, but when you get a budget, we'll talk to you. So we're going to lose thousands of jobs, potentially, because we can't do the hard work that we were elected to do. That makes no sense at all.
The governor and legislative leaders were getting back together on Friday in the hopes of reaching some sort of budget compromise to be voted on by the end of next week.
Thank you.
On Tuesday, city and town leaders, members of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, came together with a message for legislators and Governor Malloy.
CCM is going to be presenting 3 very simple guiding principles going forward in terms of getting ourselves a state budget enacted that cities and towns can rely on, and the state of Connecticut can finally move forward from this budget debate.
Number 1 principle is no impact on local property tax burden. Property taxes at the local level are very hurtful. They're very hurtful to our senior population, and they're very hurtful in particular to low-income residents. In addition, the one proposal that's been talked about is the contribution to the teacher retirement system. That cannot happen. That would overly burden the local property taxes. That cannot happen.
To go through all this and not have long and short-term reforms is absolutely ridiculous. And, you know, quite frankly, I think that had those reforms been included in the Democratic budget, we may not be having this conversation today. It's imperative that the Democratic caucus recognize and understand that these long-term reforms and short-term reforms have to be included, particularly in the areas of binding arbitration and unfunded mandates.
The final guiding principle, and I want to point out again, all of the mayors, first selectmen, town managers from big cities to small towns, rural, urban, suburban, all standing here together united, and that is that a final budget has to be a budget for the state of Connecticut and has to work for all cities and all towns. But what we've seen a lot happen in the General Assembly is we've seen groups, segments of legislators that have said, Fairfield County has a lot of money. Let's just tax the people in lower Fairfield County. It really doesn't affect our district. Well, let me tell you something. When wealthy people from Fairfield County leave the state, it affects all of us. We've seen some communities look at the situation in Tolland and say, I don't represent a district that has crumbling foundations, so it's not really a big concern to me. But if that issue is not addressed appropriately in this budget, it affects all of Connecticut. We've seen certain legislators, and I can point them out to if you want to see it even on their Facebook pages, that voted for the budget that passed, and one of the things that they said was great about this budget is that it provided no help for Hartford, because Hartford's not in their district. Let me make this clear. When struggling communities, not only like Hartford, but like Scotland, like Deep River, like West Haven, when these communities are left to fail, it affects all of us.
The lack of a state budget has created unprecedented uncertainty regarding local finances in all towns and cities across the state.
As you're aware, there are currently 2 vacancies in the Connecticut Supreme Court.
Judicial appointments were also on the governor's to-do list this week. On Wednesday, he announced his choices to replace the now retired Supreme Court Justice Dennis Evely and Justice Carmen Espinoza, who has decided to take senior status, which is a sort of semi-retirement.
For these positions, I am nominating appellate court judges who both have had very impressive careers, both on and off the bench. Maria Arujo Khan and the Honorable Rahim Mullins are the nominees. Judge Khan was born in Angola, Africa, of Portuguese descent, and emigrated to the United States at the tender age of 10 years of age. She became a judge of the Connecticut Superior Court in 2006, and until earlier this year when I had the honor of nominating her for elevation to the appellate court. I am also nominating Raheem Mullins, who himself is also a distinguished member of the appellate court. I had the honor of nominating him to become a judge of the Superior Court in 2012, and then again had the honor of nominating him for elevation to the appellate court in 2014. And there is one other announcement that I am making today. To fill one of the two vacancies which these nominations will create on the appellate court, we are making a recommendation our nomination with respect to the elevation of Judge Kahn and Judge Mullins' position. I am proud to announce that I am nominating Superior Court Judge William H. Bright, Jr. to serve on the appellate court. Judge Bright has served on the Superior Court since 2008.
The nominees then made some brief remarks.
Neither I nor my parents could have dreamed that an immigrant child who did not speak English would someday have this opportunity. I'm grateful and humbled by this honor.
Having served on the appellate court, I know that the task in front of me is an awesome task as a Supreme Court justice. The issues facing our Supreme Court are often complex and vitally important. The hallmark of the type of judge I have tried to be is one who meets the challenges of these types of complex cases by interpreting our laws fairly, faithfully, with care and restraint.
Every day, people bring judges their problems and disputes, and it is our responsibility to help them resolve them in a civil fashion. I am grateful to be able to serve those who come before me in this way. I always remind myself, though, that what we do is a team effort. I'm a better judge because of the mentoring and counsel I have received from my colleagues on the Superior Court and the support, hard work, and commitment of our court staff. If I am confirmed, I look forward to working with my colleagues on the appellate court to serve the people of Connecticut.
The judicial nominations must now go through the legislative confirmation process.
Perhaps we can have our new judges come in. Thank you.
Meanwhile, 13 new Superior Court judges who were nominated by Governor Malloy and confirmed by the legislature earlier this year attended a ceremonial swearing-in at the state capitol on Tuesday.
I am honored to be here today to welcome this new class of Superior Court judges. It's among the most diverse and varied we've ever had, both in terms of background and experience. This great diversity of experience and background will be enormously beneficial to the Superior Court of the state of Connecticut.
I ask that each of you, each of you, to put yourself in the place of the person who appears before you. That person who might be undereducated or have language deficiencies, that person who may be black or Hispanic, and quite frankly, not used to a system that represents in full array the people that he or she is part of. I ask that you understand that people appear before you nervously and unknowing, and increasingly large numbers of people appear before you without the benefit of counsel, which means in many cases you're the only person in the room that can protect their rights and make sure that justice is done.
The governor administered the oath of office to the new judges in 2 groups. Each will serve an 8-year term. On Monday, flags were lowered across the state and the country to honor the victims of the mass shooting the night before at an outdoor concert in Las Vegas, Nevada. It has been nearly 5 years since Connecticut was the scene of a mass shooting, which claimed the lives of 20 first graders and 6 educators at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown. On Monday afternoon, Governor Malloy shared his thoughts on this latest act of gun violence, which left at least 59 dead and more than 500 injured.
It demonstrates that someone with the kinds of weapons that apparently were stockpiled in this hotel room, how much havoc they can wreak. How much carnage they can cause to happen. What I believe, and I said this shortly after the Sandy Hook shooting, in fact, within 2 days of the Sandy Hook shooting, this is going to happen in your community. It's going to happen in your state. And at some point, it'll hit all 50 states. It'll hit hundreds of communities. And you could either be for taking appropriate steps to limit the access of terrorists, felons, and people with mental derangement from buying guns, or you can be on the wrong side of that equation. And I hope that more people will decide to be on the right side of that equation before this crime plays itself out in their community and takes their children, or their adults, or their teenagers, or their moviegoers, or the people attending concerts.
The Newtown shootings prompted the passage of comprehensive legislation in 2013 aimed at expanding the state's ban on assault weapons, restricting the sale and possession of large-capacity magazines that can hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition, and requiring criminal background checks for anyone purchasing a shotgun or rifle. Governor Malloy has been calling for similar action on the federal level. In the meantime, he has offered any assistance the state can give to the grieving community of Las Vegas.
We have a fair amount of experience as a result of our difficulties on the psychological support basis, social work support basis, reaching out to families. We certainly have had I think, a fair amount of success in taking on this issue, understanding it, studying it properly, putting it in the appropriate context in our own state. And quite frankly, as somebody who lived through that, and I know that the Lieutenant Governor feels exactly the same way, we had people reach out to us from Colorado, for instance, that helped us find our way through how to manage this situation in the short run and over a longer basis. And then, quite frankly, a number of my friends as mayors and governors have gone through this, and I always give the caution about taking care of oneself, as well as the first responders who appeared at the scene and had to deal with this carnage. So I think there's a lot of help we can offer.
Flags remain flying at half-staff in accordance with a proclamation from President Trump through sunset on Friday.